hard drive is full of soil, ready to be seeded with video content. And here we are, streaming Nating once again. Let's get set up here. Let's do our sound check. Seems a little quiet, maybe. We can pull our table, arrange and adjust. So welcome to our dev meeting number probably 31 or 32, something like that. We will again, as always, be vaguely continuing off where we kind of left off.
With some tangential incidental content that comes from
Tangential?
From further discussions in our Telegram. So, on the agenda today, 2 white men are going to be telling the world what gender is.
Mm-hmm. Straight white men.
2 straight white men, yes, exactly. We're going to be discussing gender. So,
you were trying to hide that fact.
Oh yes, I was totally trying to circumvent the
punishment.
Yeah.
So as usual, we have a running vocabulary, if you will, a running glossary of terms that have been developed over the last year through these live stream meetings, which we've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
All the terms take shape in context of each other, so it's kind of like a giant self-referential web in which we appropriate terms from the outside world, quote unquote, and try to adapt them in a very as meaningful way as possible so that words still retain their kind of essence as they're used in society.
Their connotations.
However, when it's used within the Portal Mountain framework, we're having very specific meanings that we're trying to get to.
That are interrelated to them.
Because you're pulling, we're implied that there's a pulling up of a web of meaning in all these different terms. And so don't feel lost. Always feel free to ask a question or do a search for a term if anything comes up.
Hopefully we have it defined somewhere.
Yep. There is the rudimentary glossary on the Portal Mountain wiki. So let's get our chat.
So let's kick off
here.
why we're delineating it a little bit into this subject again.
This is going to be a shorter meeting as well, only about 3 hours.
It's a short meeting. It's short and sweet. It's short. I want it to be self-contained, hopefully. So that once we tackle the subject, we don't
self-contained to a topic, right? And we wanted to kind of carry on, ideally, if we can, about the faith bootstrap.
Yeah, and how it's all connected, and in fact, what this conversation might have to do with that conversation, because they are actually much more intimately related than may seem at face value.
Right.
In fact, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about as far as gender goes serves as a background for serves as context as how to understand other things, how they've been thought of, and how they interrelate too. So first things first, let's get the offensive stuff out of the way.
Okay.
And that is essentially the age-old trope of associating chaos with the female and the order with the male. Under our modeling, it still is retained. However, one thing to note right off the bat is that both are essentially just 2 sides of a single coin that we refer to as the absurd. So in this case, we're not referring to either side being inherently good, bad, or dark, or evil, or light and great, and all of that kind of typical dichotomous sort of delineation of these concepts. More like to start off with a platform of where we have 2 sides of a coin. They're complementary, and then going to look at the significance of having 2 sides to begin with, and then its implication and whatnot. And the other thing to mention is because we've done this, what we're not doing is that we're not associating the words male and female so much to the biology of the human being, but more to the mythological thinking that is stemming from what we're talking about, order, chaos, and such different, so to speak, metaphors. Right. So that is to say, we're basing the concepts of man and woman and all of that on a specific mythology, which we're also bringing to the table as we're discussing it. So, with that said, it's not going to be a discussion about men and women and the political problems that are involved today. Although those subjects are going to be sort of mentioned in their relationship to the discussion that we're having. So yeah, kind of wanted to get that out of the way so that we have a baseline as to what we're going to dive into and what we're definitely not going to try to touch with a 10-foot pole.
I kind of was busy there and kind of gapped out a bit, but I think one of the points that you probably went into was that the distinction between biological apprehension of this and
Yeah.
the mythological apprehension.
So I've been calling it like an ontological.
This is how we're
yeah.
distinguishing that order and chaos isn't like
A description
dick
of
and vagina.
yeah. We're not referring to men and women as one is a chaotic because they have a vagina and one is ordered because they have a penis.
Right, and you see that the dick is dangling there, so therefore this must be representative of order.
Yeah, that's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying.
Don't do that.
What we're saying
Don't
is
get
that
confused.
we're trying to use familiar words to demonstrate the concept of complementarity of what seems to be sort of like an opposing element, but it's really just a way to unify into a whole that is greater than both. So conceptually speaking, that is always going to be what the distinction of men and women is, male and female and all of that, and then we're going to go into why one distinction is made a certain way, like what chaos brings to the table and where do we find that in the female descriptors, and likewise what order signifies in the male descriptors. So first, right off the bat, concept that we use here is usually the seed and soil. The idea of materializing an entire plant life, if you will, from the materials of the soil. So the seed starts up this interaction, chemical interaction that allows it to grow by siphoning elements from the soil itself, reconstructing them into a different format that is itself, realizing itself as it grows into another tree, only so it could produce another seed and repeat the process. And so the cycle of reproduction and taking in deconstructed materials and reconstructing them into something is the relationship between the chaos, the deconstructed format, and ultimately the ideal format that is thought of as the hyperstition, and then the materialization of the chaotic elements and ordering them into that ideal. So that would be the main, again, background for how to understand where maleness and femaleness is coming in this mythology. And of course, the template to that is also easy to see, aside from tree and ground, is of course human procreation, where the man seeds
But
the
this is
womb.
always just loaded.
Yeah, it's very loaded. It's very metaphorical, and it has not, and it is not connected
not
to politics.
not to make a pun or anything. But,
Yeah.
and I think we need to right away, again, so people meditating about this, thinking about this kind of stuff. What is this order chaos? Where is the distinction? How do you define? Right away, let's stop and say that the seed. So you have an actual seed that you can plant in your hand. To say that is order, this is already a mistake. You've taken the entire seed as if it, including its matter, is the order itself.
Right.
Whereas the seed is made up of nutrient materials, genetic materials, these things kind of dormant, ready to be activated in motion.
It's sitting in potential form. Much like the ground, the soil is the same kind of potential. So here, actually, the analogy would indicate the seed is itself female. Like in the, if we to continue the analogy, is a potential. It's not constructed yet. It's all the things that it could be, right? But the process itself to construct
Right.
the full tree out of
And
that
the soil itself
would be the order.
The soil itself is can be seen or broken down into
Yeah.
male sort of order type complex adaptive systems stacking
Well, you can call
built into that.
You could call the full-blown environment with all of its pieces already working together, right? If it's a full construct, then that is the male expression. So, any real entity is seen from both sides of this coin, really, because the body is seen as, in our parlance, also is seen as the female element for the mental process, but at the same time it acts as the male element in its environment, right? And the environment acts as the male counterpart to the female ecosystem,
And you have
the
stacking.
ecosystem is, and so on and so on and so on. So from below it's like a female, from above it's like a male, or in reverse. I haven't thought this out through.
Well, we've looking at. We can probably pull up one of our charts here. Like this chart, right? Just the idea that in any unit you're having a female feminine interface looking upwards towards the male, looking downwards, and the stack is happening like that at different layers and layers.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, and it's interesting that you brought this, because what this is showing is actually a step further. It's when these roles are reified back down and reassigned onto the ontology. So this is what. So this is the breaking point that of civilization that we're talking about, the breakaway civilization.
Right.
That point is where, rather than
This is the problem we're talking about, that we
Yeah.
keep trying to say don't do that right now.
like writing on the mythology, which is templated after the ontology, is where we kind of leave it at. But the step further, the breakaway element, is when you take that mythology and you start to say, oh, in your ontology, that these categories now literally apply to men, to women, to children, to whatever. And by doing that secondary reification downwards towards the ontology is the hotbed of all the conflict in terms of gender roles and all of that kind of stuff.
Yes, because what have we done? The classic toxicity, classic male toxicity to overwrite what is below with what's in one's own mind.
So-
My order is the truth of what is there. You have a vagina, whatever, therefore you must be in the kitchen, because my ontology says so.
Right. So it's a kind of like a runaway. What's interesting to note is that it's the taking away of something that is kind of what we would say it comes to us from nature, right? With the idea that we have different bodies and whatnot that we can use the mythology to give meaning to. So basically, to template our mythology against our biology was is something that came rather naturally to us, because those are the tools we had at hand to work with.
Right.
What's interesting is that how closely this relationship got.
Hey, Jack, buddy.
Not closely.
He has joined the YouTube chat. Nice.
Not closely. How subtly this still reflects that, but it's taken. But that's secondary step forward by applying it to actual ontological agencies across civilization, across culture, across community, now started to peg people not based on their relationship with the myth, but rather with the relationship with where they find themselves in the ontological matrix, and that removes all meaning that
Mhm.
that such a mythology could have actually brought to
Right.
the table.
So it becomes machine-like, mechanistic. You
Right.
are this object type, therefore you slot into the machine like this. Nothing can ever change.
Right, and it is this removal of the meaning of the myth that makes that hollows out first of all the structure itself, the point of the structure itself, to have the mythology of the male and the female becomes a completely useless trope that is only used as a signal mechanism to
Mhm.
virtue signal.
Right.
And
Well, this is because the myth is supposed to be elucidating the archetypal, the
one's own experience, one's own actual experience. When it's reversed like that, what happens is that it's not your longer your experience.
Yeah. No, that's
It's an externalized experience that is
this
being
is what I mean.
downloaded into you
A-
by others. And it's foreign. It's got nothing to do with
By
anything.
archetypal, I mean a dynamic relationship that's happening between your model and your experience. And if we reify it down to just this ontology, an ontological reification, we lose out on the potential of all the dynamic, the dynamism.
Its whole point. We lose out on its entire point,
Right.
and in fact, it's circumvented entirely.
It always happens like that. That's shifting the window down,
Right.
the
And so, what I want to say,
cognitive alignment window.
yeah. So what I want to say to that is that because of this case, because of what happens through that, it is impossible to have a coherent, aka Portal Mountain style coherent conversation with that has anything to do with men or women in the political backdrop of today's world. We can't have that conversation simply because what we would be doing is reiterating exactly the same problematic cycle by doing so. So we would be feeding it instead of actually trying to see what where and how this actual problem is materialized. And so that's really why we
Right,
can't.
the meta narrative,
Yeah.
is what should be brought up.
This is why we really can't say men in general are this, women in general are that. We are not going to make those kinds of statements safe to
Right.
safe to
That's a
to,
crutch.
to make an analogy about something. Maybe yes, like you can't avoid generalities in speech, but what we're not going to be doing is we're not going to be saying that women have particular roles in society or men have those things. What we're going to be saying is that there's actually a much more of a blend of the two, with a variety of different expressions,
Always context matters.
and the ones that tend to skew the conversations are the elements that show up as hijacking of masculinity into a variety of what we would now call toxic cycles, in which the actual masculinity is misused by all involved, by men and women, misused and pointed in a direction that pertains to actually neither of them.
Right. Yep. And Jack is just bringing up the point that it's emotional. People take these things personally because we within our own ontology are identifying as man and women and taking a side, and it becomes instantly heated.
Right. So,
But this is a crutching, ontological crutching, and and this is at the heart of the problem that we've been discussing about civilization, is this tendency to operate like a machine and to have these hard-coded ontological realities that we exist within, which is really how we are programmed.
yeah. So, and in this case, we can point to a specific case of what we called illiteralism, and that is to say, okay, because it is to take a mythology and mistake it for the ontology. is really what it is. And by that I mean it's to take the words literally for reality. It's to fail to see them as a metaphor, and insist on their either fact or ethic based on
Right. Now, this was my main.
based on where they appear within the ontology.
This is my gripe with how many people interpreted Christianity, in that they would put such a heavy weight on the historical factness of the cross, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and they would spend all their time digging up, oh, this historical account said that it happened, and this evidence said that it happened, and like so many people said that it happened, so therefore it must, and like this is all, so okay, so some fact in history is true for you. Big frickin' deal.
Now what? Does that
Right.
does that fact make you more or less of an asshole? Because oftentimes facts make people more of an asshole.
Right.
That's just
Carry on. I can keep up with the chat.
right. Neither is correct inherently, and that's sort of where we're making the point. Is that actually, like if we were to apply the mythology, it needs to be applied to experience, not your ideology, right? You can be thinking whatever you want to be thinking, but those words, the way we are using them, man and woman, do not mean anything in those in those what do you call them? In those ideas. What we're trying to draw the line for is that each experience, each moment is experienced with both male and female qualities that are brought to the table. The female qualities would be the potential, the male qualities would be the actual, right? And so this is something that comes with experience of all people, regardless of what's between the legs, right? So this is where we kind of really try to drive at. Now that said, there is sexual dimorphism in the human race. Like, it's not a secret that, hormones tend to exert differently, and muscle mass tends to express differently, fat mass tends to express differently. All of these things are in a complementary system of where, since one side of the equation has different energy demands, the other side of the equation must somehow complement that. It's a very, very much unified situation. So the fact that our physiology morphed slightly more to accommodate the biological processes like that simply talks to how this can be moving around within the biological realm. But it doesn't. But the mental realm is not necessarily needs to keep in step with it, right? Like so while it provides material for the mythology, based on the ontology, like now we have actual men, actual women in biological sense. It doesn't mean that it has to now become rules and regulations.
However, right, it doesn't
stuff.
have to be. However, nature is hinting at something.
It's hinting at the complementarity.
It's hinting at the fact that there can be different mythologies for different kind of expressions of being, right?
Yes. That is true, because this is not the only divide we are actually discussing. Male and female is just one of the prominent subjects that pertain to order and chaos.
Right.
But it's not necessarily the same discussion as, say, guild dynamics or any of that. But my point really is that it would be a mistake to take template that we used for mythology, and then to then begin to reify that in terms of mechanisms.
Right. And mechanisms happen by, like taking a symbol and reifying its meaning to be hard coded with reality. So you see
Right, so
a dick hanging between legs. That means you send
Well,
them
this is a
off to
better
war.
example because, let's say I'm married, I have this ring on my finger. Somebody looks at that ring, they know I'm partnered. Look, that's a reification. This ring reifies upwards, right? Actually, no. This ring reifies downwards because it exists in a higher abstract level of thought, right? But it's talking about a pattern below itself.
Yeah.
So this is a download reification, and in the same way, this is the same reification that happens when you take the mythological men and women, and you now reify them as ontological beings in some ideology. Right. First of all, you've removed their experience from the equation entirely and placed them inside an ideological narrative. So, in that narrative, no beings exist, only words.
Okay. Can I just bring up a quick point here? These two modes and ways of thinking, we have clearly, very clearly, came to this
Give me a
point.
moment, though. Let's keep that thought.
We'll keep the thought, but the cognitive alignment window. Here we can see two boxes, and we're going to take a short break here, but just quickly. In this box, these triad, the ontology, the type of objects available to you are basically solidified when you're utilizing this triad. If you shift it down, suddenly you have access to mythology in here. This would be ontology and mythology. The mythology allows for the ontology itself to be dynamically adjusted based on the experience of the object. And with that, we'll be right back. unmute it, and then come right back to this. All I pointed out, just for your benefit, these two different apprehensions of myth,
Is that for me?
yeah, have been described years and years ago, that this work that we did with the cognitive alignment window shifting. I was saying within this triad, your archetype is the ontological, right? So this is what's timeless and never changes. That's, for natural reasons, yes, sometimes you should be in that mode where just reality is what it is. You're running from a tiger, it has claws. You don't want to die. You don't need to sit there and negotiate with reality about what exists and what doesn't in that moment. However, take this triad and shift it down, suddenly the mythological becomes your underpinning. And these two modes of... and so with the mythological being the underpinning, your ontology becomes dynamic with experience, the object-type relationship.
As things shift, you shift.
Right. So we need to come back to that. We need to anchor this discussion in that window, because you shift it one way, you shift it the other. It has a totally different effect.
So one way I've said this to people is that you should carry your beliefs and use your beliefs like you would use clothes. You wear the correct garment for the correct occasion. Right? Yeah, it's just me being me. You wear the correct one for the... So what does that mean? It means that from moment to moment, your belief system should not be static, because the moments aren't static. To the point of where, yes, there are situations in the moment which would require you to not start questioning reality and escape it.
Where things are just happening fast.
But notice that in this, what we're describing is like ages and ages ago, when men lived in nature, if you will, without civilization to burden him down. He wasn't... The ego had no reason to exist all the time. Right? And so there would be a time for when the tiger comes to get up and go and do
daily existence,
and then it would subside back into just a normal quality.
If you and your tribe are taking care of business, picking, foraging, hunting, everybody's happy, you don't have to work for too much time, but you do what you can. That excess time allows your experience, I think, to be much more
integrated.
I was gonna say like lucidity, dream-like kind of.
Yes, and this is correct. And what did I call it when I first came up with this? I called it it was a lucid dream, basically, yeah, and it became a non-lucid nightmare. But anyway, I'm digressing here. I wanted to point out something about this discrepancy window. There's another diagram.
I mean, because there's so much free time that you can actually just sit there and negotiate a relationship with the reality around you. There's time to do it.
Right, which we don't
have that now. Yeah. So that's part of the soul. That's a missing piece of the soul.
So part of the trick here is that even with the cognitive alignment misaligned pre-civilization, right, we still have a case where the mimetic layer is mirrored in the shared. Right? So this is where storytelling and mythology would be coming from, right?
Yeah.
But because they're parallel, they're sort of integrated into the objective reality at the same time. So it's your own experience in coming through from the bottom and the top and reinforming it back and forth, right? So, and you're doing this all subconsciously, because you don't need to explicitly meditate, as your whole life winds up being a sort of a meditative experience.
Well, and not only that, but the mind seems to work to apprehend complexity through analogy. So when we hear stories of certain myth and heroes did this and that, it's kind of in the back of our mind as a resource of archetypal the imprints that we can take from the heavens onto ourselves subconsciously.
So really, the necessity of the artifact comes from the fact that we have lost the traditional element that would allow us to grow into this naturally, aka we are doing everything we can to educate ourselves away from being able to do this. And with that came the necessity to, again, educate how to do this.
Right.
On top of that, because there's so much education to remove it from the picture. And so instead of allowing the parallel the parallelism work between the narrative and the mimetic to inform each other, since that link has been broken explicitly, we have to reestablish the cognitive window explicitly, so that it's actually a task that we have to perform on top of all these other tasks to even get back to not doing those. It feels almost backwards.
It's interesting to call it a task, and to really make it a piece of technology. This ability to shift that window down, and to have the knowledge of the archetype, basically.
And that's like almost the sad part is that we've broken nature, so now we have to insert an artifact back in to what's broken. So we've broken the natural capacity for it, and only to get to a point of where it becomes explicitly necessary to reintegrate it back.
Just adding those
Yep.
for good form.
So that's kind of the lowdown of what's happening there. And yes, the shifting, like, of the window as such, actually gives a more explicit view of male and female points that are being made in our mythology, and why they become necessitated, because there's been an artificial split to begin with, so we have to work with an artificial split to work backwards from
Now,
it.
we do have another chart very related to this, which is, I think, called, like, it's labeled as, like, the hard problem of science. And I think it maybe more demonstrates a bit that disconnection of the mind from the body below, through the mimetic, through the memeplex, through apprehension of it, we gain a sense of the body. Just by knowing what the memeplex does at that layer, how it orders and pulls up order out of all the senses.
So in this case, we're also talking about how the body creates thought. So we're not just saying physical properties. We're talking about the body as it is perceived by the mental processes, how the physical processes are perceived by the mental processes. So it's all the whole picture together. It's not just we're not just talking about separate entities, if you will.
Right. And
so thoughts is something your body produces via the brain.
I'm just reminded of yet another chart which kind of explicitly connects all these. So these mind sort of processes we were just talking about. We have the narrative and the type here, the two windows that we were just talking about, right? But this is a continuum, all from the physical, particle, biological, cell, neural, nerve, signal, up to
an entire
cosmos, polyverse.
An entire expression of the meta-narrative.
Reality. Just reality existing, quote unquote.
At those layers is where you find things like language. So language is something that's given to you to utilize upwards. So it's something that comes to you from the upper layer of meaning, like language creates the meaning of words, and all of a sudden you can now tap into that space up there for yourself to communicate meaning across to another person or another something or other. Right. So there's always this interaction of bottom up and top down in the soul. And these layers are meant to point out to the ones that are most significant for our discussion. There's obviously going to be systems out there that do not necessarily require everything here.
This is core. What I just wanted to highlight there is the horizon, if you will, which we become sort of disconnected from the causal relationship of things and matter happening down here, and our thoughts, our thought processes. They're disconnected from the causality of down here if we can't reconcile the archetype here in the mimetic layer. If we can't shift that window down to gain access to how is that causally related.
How do the artifacts that come through the senses
over this horizon
turn to be the narratives at the end of the day that we are actually reacting and responding to, aka how do these artifacts gain meaning? And the mimetic layer is the layer that stitches together different artifacts to give them meaning, hence the recognition of that layer becomes the focal point of trying to establish that process.
Right. It's so simple. So from there, I just wanted to bring up another related chart, and it's kind of great that we printed out all these, painstakingly printed them out, so that we have something to refer back to later. Of course, our filing system
Sucks.
leaves something to be desired.
Which diagram are you looking for?
This one. This one.
This one.
Right.
Back to our
So
order.
we're gonna move from
chaos.
this to this.
So, what the hell is this? Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. The connection here, right? I'll start.
Let's keep it right there.
I'll start with the connection between the previous diagram.
Sure. Yeah.
So, this diagram is a treatment of the 8th layer, the abstract layer, and what the type processing. The question it's trying to answer is, if we were to look at the abstract phase space, which is basically
Process.
which is basically what that layers is referred to as. It has types in it, but it also has subjects and aspects. It's a whole other discussion about its structure, but the biggest point there is now the assumption is that now you have a working biological entity, and the question is being asked, how would its mental operating system would stitch together an ongoing picture simulation of reality at any given moment, coming in from the senses, from thought processes, from anything. So look, so the actual playing field of material in abstract space
So if I may,
that phases about and shifts and moves and the mechanisms that are actually at work.
if I may paraphrase or whatever, this chart is meant to more look at what are we dealing with with this neural operating system that we have, and this is useful for discussion about scientism and moving beyond the
Typical,
the horizon to an inner science, if you will. So that this gives you that ability to still have a reasoned exploration
to connect
within
the
your
pieces.
neurology, which is where science stops. It stops dead at that point of the subjective experience, right? But we can continue. That's what this chart highlights, that stack and of having this whole universal paradigm of me experiencing and creating a universe out of particles.
So this one assumes that you already
Is separate. This is okay. The thing that is stacked up like that and doing neurology is creating living, organizing systems,
internal and external,
which it knows about. This is how it models systems that exist.
And so one of the first assumptions we're making about that system is that it's sitting in what's called a pure potential, meaning regardless of previous events, it can always realize, it can always actualize anything it has a potential to do so, regardless of which trajectory it's on right now. So that means it could change its mind. It means it could take a small input and create a great output, and in reverse, and so on and so forth. It basically behaves in a way that is entirely up to itself, rather than the causal systems that make it up. And
Right,
so
being
this
that,
is
those being the last chart.
yeah, so this is kind of like
Hofstadter in there with the symbolic vestigial and all that, right?
yeah, and then so this is where we are getting to a point of how does pure potentiality look like from the perspective of itself? How does it how is it experienced to be in the state of pure potentiality? So the assumption is basically being made that even if I thought a thought before, it does not have to it does not have to mean this outcome. It could mean it could be circumvented by a secondary thought and changed into its opposing outcome,
Right.
and so on and so forth. The potentiality itself is infinite in its
So what you seem to be pointing at is uncertainty right off the bat,
uncertainty right off the bat, absurdity.
which we find at the bottom of the chart there on the left.
Yes.
This stack right here, the primordial stack, will find the most kind of generic descriptions, and
Yeah.
then they kind of
But
spread out.
But the first thing is first, before we even get to that sort of like thing, our experiential world is effectively non-rational, absurd, right? Because the disconnection that that emergence causes, right? It's a self-tautological statement. I am. Existence exists, and so on and so forth.
Right.
i.e. taking the idea that whatever appears in that abstract phase space to be real, right? If you try to actually stitch it all together, what you get is a huge, ginormous absurdity that does not correlate logically to itself.
So this again, I think Hofstadter was into regarding the descriptability of that which from you emerged. How do you even are you able to describe it?
So one of the things that comes up mathematically is that if you have a complicated enough system, it will simply state things like, I am a sentence that this is a sentence that does not exist in this system, and by virtue of being stated, right? Two things. It is correct because you cannot ever reach that statement from the perspective of the system, but the fact that it is correct that you cannot reach it in the system being expressed by the same system makes it true. So its falsehood is its truth at the same time, and so even right from that point you have a paradox of a self-existent entity, and this can happen on any codified layer, and with sufficient complexity you get the picture of the polyglottic Quine relay, which we can get into, but we shouldn't right now because it's a different layer entirely in treatment.
Anyways, so chaos and order. We're trying to bring back the whole male-female mythological discussion.
So we're starting with the absurd, which divides itself out into the chaotic and the order.
So can I just pre-jog this discussion here?
Can you do it by self?
We can, but just very quickly.
Sorry, it's my bad.
It's not a bad. I just wanted to bring back that point again that, okay, so in the previous chart we've shown how we have this, we can discuss the organization, the order of our neurological operating system in this kind of a stack. So that's one stack there. Next is, what does this stack actually do? It needs to do things that recur throughout time. So it needs to build things that become bootstrapped and then cycle continuously, or maybe they die, right? So
Yeah.
we are
Which is a continuation of what it is.
a neurological operating system which has been bootstrapped in the exact same type of a manner, which is interested in bootstrapping things. You make a business, you make a family, you build a car, you restore a car.
You make your myth.
It becomes up to that thing. So this is just, I wanted to say, a generic way of apprehending what we do. With the earth, with the world, with the soil of the world,
How do we shape it into its own order?
we shape it up into things that sustain, and they do a function and they go away.
So effectively, the reflection of what we are comes out through our activities.
Right, and these are slightly different things. And
So what we are physically comes out in reflection and in mental things. So because we grow and are, like renew the physical in physical form all the time. I'm not talking about reincarnation. I'm just saying that this new person is born all the time.
mm-hmm.
It's a physical thing. Ideas are born all the time. Ideas merge into each other. Like that entire process continues on within the mental world, and this is where we start to get into a mythology that tries to nail down a particular merging of ideas and concepts and whatnot, which we
Right.
have many, and this is one.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting introduction. I think that'll get us going. Until then, be right back. And with that, we are back.
Okay, so really, like, the order and the chaos thing is about purity of potential. Something is it's like, to understand this, all you really have to think about is the idea of signal and noise ratios, right? On any given signal, like any given channel rather, or not channel, carrier,
Mm-hmm.
right? What makes it a carrier is that it's always got something going on it, which is called noise, aka you can't interpret anything out of what the patterns are. But at the same time, some of the patterns could become what's called signal, or understandable chunks of something. These so these constitute order, and the not understandable ones constitute chaos.
Well,
The key to understanding again why this is not a bad, why one is not bad versus one being good, is because first of all, it's the same. Noise and signal are made up of the same bits, right? The second part to it is that what constitutes order is a perspective. So one can look at those bits one way and see order in one pattern, but shifted around could be looked at another way, and shifted around could be looked at another way. And lo and behold, this whole thing doing that is itself chaotic. But is it a bad kind of chaos? I wouldn't say so. It's a purely potential kind of chaos. It's anything is possible. It's not a darkness. It's not a, it's not a evil. It's just big, and it's not, and you can't pin it down. You can't control it.
So programmatically, you brought up some time ago. We call them aspects, right? To be able to look at a set of objects with a different typology or a cosmos.
So a subject shift, right? Subject is a kind of a nesting structure. So you can be a subject within a subject within a subject. So it's kind of like a me being in a room which is inside this building, which is inside this city, which isn't, like, there's always these layering in subject, in where the subject is. There's also parallel subjects, like me and you sitting in the same room but seeing it from two different sides. So this is subject. Subjects control not just what we see, but what we think those things do. So in one subject, this table behaves like a table holding things. In another subject, I can just sit my ass down on it, and it becomes my chair. Right? So this is just a matter of... so an aspect is basically what activity you choose to do in that moment, given whatever subjective layering you have. And every time you shift subjects around, should get this, you can get this exact same ontology, but things to do with it will become completely different.
So is like an aspect kind of riding on top of the subject stack? Or do we need to not get into that right now? Because all I wanted to point out was that we have ways of programming reality within a virtual reality.
Subject can say this object is an aspect. For example, one subject can say that this aspect is a subject. They're going to morph into each other. They're nebulous entities, and they are shifted from moment to moment, which makes the whole structure entirely unstable.
I guess I kind of intuited like a subject being a chaos in an aspect order kind of correlation.
It's the set of rules that are true for the right now. It's the set of
That's an
rules.
aspect?
Yeah, an aspect is a set of rules that sit behind of the web of things. So you have thingness and the stuff that happens to things. Both of which are dictated by subjects. So what the thing is a subject dependent, but also how this thing interacts is subject dependent, and whatever mesh of subjects you've got going on at that time, right, drives that. The thing is that one of the things that can happen is that what you do with your object is change your subject. Like, right, you can have a situation where an object is an indicator that you need to shift perspectives, which shifts all your aspects, which shifts how you relate to the same object again. And that could happen not instantly, but from moment to moment to moment. It's incredibly difficult to pinpoint what is where. That brings us to like a discussion of, say, why it would be important to take on a very simple meme to observe for feedback observation to slow that whole deal down enough to be able to follow it enough and to see it for what it is.
I still have that feeling that like this chaos order dynamic somehow plays into subject aspect dynamic. Like they seem kind of
Well, yes.
they seem to align a bit. Like subject being the context of what it is, aspect being okay. What are what are the marching orders?
Yes,
what's
exactly.
actually going to happen.
That's
now.
correct. That is a correct way. So yeah, you get a kind of a female-male perspective on that.
Good.
And it's the same way. It's the same kind of chaos that I was just describing. Taking a different perspective, order is different. Taking a different perspective, order is different. So subjective stuff is chaotic. Hence, to the on the female spectrum again, and all of that. And where we get the idea, like there is a in the solipsistic spectrum, that's where the subjective female finds herself, if you will. From all, like that's where the femaleness of the subjective comes from, right? Like that's where the connotations come from, not from again.
What I really wanted to
gender,
pull up here,
discussions.
so this is the big chart. We don't need to get into it, but these are like just some little details about programming your abstract. So abstract phase space here, but your space and how it connects with the narrative.
And time.
Space and time there. I wanted to mention that we do as a people, as a civilization, we're getting into virtual reality and all that kind of stuff, and we've been able to programmatically recreate the processes that go on in the mind to have objects and interact in the ways that they do in such a fluid way. And it turns out there are some very
Strong correlations.
and like very programmatic rules that even our own neural operating system follows, right? Which we can identify
And now, this is not this is not like that debate between determinism or fate or any of that kind of crap.
realize I pushed right into that.
Yeah, this is not that kind of question, because if you remember, one of the previous things we said about emergence is that there is a horizon between between layers in which the emergent layer is not necessarily at the whims of the causal systems that underlies it. It utilizes them as its own self-made patterns.
Right.
So it still relies on
And
them, but it
even-
isn't dictated by. But it dictates what they do rather.
Not
than
only that truth, but something that probably adds to it is the fact that an emergent layer cannot know the structure below it. Aside from the rudimentary language that it speaks at its layer to try and take care of what's below it, otherwise it explodes. So
Yeah.
it has to exist with some...
it can only have a small subset of representational information.
which
for
it
it.
must have.
For example,
But it's never perfect.
To be hungry and to have your body eat for you. It doesn't know anything about acid levels or the need for more mucus in your stomach or whatnot. Everything is like totally hidden away from you. You just feel hungry. You just feel the need to taste something.
And at each emergent layer, good point, you don't necessarily reinvent the whole wheel. It's not like the entire body gets reprogrammed in a new higher language.
Right.
In some way it kind of does, but in another, the processes that are allowed, the emergence, just keep happening.
That's another interesting point. When the processes start to dig very deep into what's happening, it tends to be a destructive situation in which you do dissections and
The patient is killed on the operating
while
table.
you're asking, oh yes, the patient died, but the operation is a success.
Yep. Ta-da.
So yeah, this is really that
So
subject.
it's kind of an aside. I just wanted to mention that there are programmatic type aspects that we kind of rely on. For
So
this.
again, the next thing we go from we defined pure potential to be an absurdity. We've looked at where order and chaos emerge in that absurdity, in that in even order itself is a chaotic element.
So
And now,
Right.
and now the other part of the experience of all of that is the notion that it all happens in a space through time,
Right.
where things consolidate and decay.
Right. So we're moving from our chart. We're moving to the right.
Yeah, and then and then we're moving that way. And the reason time and decay are in the chaotic spot is primarily because with time everything shifts, and because decay, because things that were put together have fallen apart. Likewise, space is the static platform on which everything takes place, so it's the most ordered, if you will. Notice it's vacant, but ordered. And the other element of order is the movement into consolidating
vacant.
things.
It's vacant. What
Space
vacant?
is empty. The
You
platform
mean
itself.
physical space?
Yeah, well, conceptual space is the backdrop against which things happen. So by definition, space doesn't happen. Space is in that conceptual framework. It's
Okay.
not. I'm not talking about scientific space. I'm talking about the conceptual framework here. Time is constant shifting of things. Space is the constant non-shifting of things.
Yeah.
Being the top and the bottom of order and decay. And in between those two, we have things either falling apart into chaos or consolidating into order. And that is the experience of pure potentiality in its four-pronged movements, or how it comes, like how it moment by moment is experienced. A moment in space through time of consolidation and decay, all happening every moment at any given time.
Right.
And then
So this is our myth.
this is the building of our myth, of the backdrop of the mental abstract phase space. And finally, we now can get to the primordial archetypes that define the characteristics that are always true to that space. So the first characteristic is its uncertainty. Second characteristic comes from uncertainty, becomes entropy.
Right. So we're walking up this stack here.
Yeah, but entropy is essentially the whole picture of how space-time looks. And more to that, that picture is defined by matter, because that's what we're looking at. That's what does those things. And matter is what becomes life as it becomes more animated through its interactions, and death is what happens to life as it emerges. And from there we have the animal that is the thing that lives and dies, and from there we have the human that can think about those things, and from there we have all the mechanisms by which we think, mechanisms by which we act, and organize ourselves into an ordered state from a chaotic uncertainty. So that's
Fiat
that.
Corp state.
Yeah.
Did you kind of gloss over those? a
No,
bit?
no. Mechanism of how to live. The fiat is the employment of that mechanism. Corporation is the organization through the mechanism, and state is the final ordered state based on all of these corporations. I didn't gloss over it. I just didn't explicitly mention it.
Yep. That's definitely a chart for meditation.
So all of that said, there's a kind of interesting trajectory from chaos into order. Now, left at that, you get the Breakaway Civilization.
And order into chaos.
Where is the return to chaos? Where is the return in acknowledgement of chaos? Well, the first step would be
Where did we go wrong?
The first step
First
would
off.
be in not recognizing the stack as it climbed out of uncertainty into a state. But without recognizing that stack, there's no reflection back to the chaos from which it has emerged.
Right.
Hence, run away. If you'll notice, the bottom of the stack contains death, life, matter, space-time, entropy, and uncertainty, and all of those things we try to eliminate from society.
You're right.
In that order.
So just writing a note, I think it's interesting that we bring this up. The Breakaway Civilization, where did it all go wrong? And I don't know if we skipped a step or two, but I think you're right that to be aware that our systems come out of this and sort of kind of emergently stack. If we have a state or a corporation or whatever, where did it come from? Where is its roots? What is it? What does it? So,
What's it for?
How can it be sustained? For one, that's the question you kind of ask back into chaos. Like, is the state affirming what the state came from? So the hero's journey, the return to the divine feminine kind of thing. Right. States and corporations in this day and age exist for their own purpose, profit. Right.
Right.
It's disconnected from how they got there.
So the disconnect is that they don't reach the human in its. So if you were to reverse the thinking and you start off with state is the default, right? So we have civilization. We have civilization is broken down into institutions. That's the corporate
Mm-hmm.
level, and those institutions govern by fiat, aka through legislation, the mechanisms of the world. Right. So we've reached that point from top down. Here's what's missing. We stopped at the mechanisms of the world, but those mechanisms are they constitute humanity. We don't recognize humanity. We recognize mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
This is the the broken part.
We're walking down the stack right now.
Right. We're walking down the stack, and we stop short of reaching ourselves.
So in other words, we're just a cog in a machine.
The machine is where it stays. Yes. So we don't have humans in the Breakaway Civilization. We just have the top 3 tiers, who, by not recognizing the lower elements of the stack, don't work with it to mitigate its effects, but rather offload it. In other words, under the rug.
Offload is the word we
sweep
use.
it under the rug, and eventually that garbage falls out on a lower end, the lower end of the spectrum, where somebody can no longer afford to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have the mechanisms in place to continue offloading.
Right.
And those are the humans that get crushed under the ego stack.
Mm-hmm. And offloading is a process that of the individual responsibility becoming exported to some nebulous somebody out there is going to take
Something
care
just
of it.
came to me. Offloading is what we need to juxtapose against reflecting.
Reflect.
When the stack is proper, like takes into account the chaos, it reflects it, right, in some way. It recognizes it's there, and then by that recognition, recognizes an activity based on that fact. Offloading just means recognizing it's there and making it somebody else's responsibility.
Now, I would take responsibility as more of an ideal word.
Making it somebody else's fault. The responsibility is here. But by making it somebody's fault, you're removing responsibility.
Right.
And they do the same. So they remove responsibility. So they remove responsibility.
Right.
They remove responsibility, and now the last person on the chain that can no longer be remove the responsibility gets crushed by the system.
And this is the flame at the bottom of the ego stack, which everybody panics to get
You've
away
been
from.
you've been broken off from the bottom, so you don't matter anymore to the stack. Now we can process you for whatever this is.
Meat.
And again, I'm going to say I will not discuss things that go that route. That's why I don't discuss things that go that route, because of how I see it.
Well,
in
it's
that
really
format.
tough to stay on point and focused and centered, and I think we've been so carefully tiptoeing around this process of model production that we try to watch out. Hey, if anybody sees anything that we missed, tell us. But yeah, we've taken such great care not to feed into the systemic, toxic mode of thinking.
All right, so let's get back to why we have a case of what we would call toxic masculinity.
And just before we do that, I just want to note we're an hour and 15 minutes into this. We have maybe another hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
So we're at maybe our halfway mark here.
Hour
So
and 13 minutes.
right.
Sorry. Do you want to
Nature calls.
tie in this discussion with back to where male, female comes from and all of that, like how it's how we're gonna go back into the male leading the running away process, not the female because of machinery
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. So the toxic masculinity.
Because we've just basically touched
Subject.
on the archetypes.
Right.
Basically, definition.
So this breakaway process is mythologically male, in that this is the kind of order imposing back down onto the body, the people, the tribe, the city, state, whatever. This order being imposed down, which is fundamentally disconnected from the body itself. So, with the Breakaway Civilization archetype, something has emerged collectively, which is fundamentally disconnected from that which it emerged. So, let's say the people, and how does this happen? So, I think, have already gone very deep a number of times into discussing this, the actual point at which it happened, when suddenly, like about grain and alcohol production and all that. The archetype, though, is related to this cognitive alignment window that we brought up, and a neglect of the cognitive alignment window is what allowed the first archetype of the Breakaway Civilization to exist. When we started building grain and having a walled city, that cognitive window alignment glitch, if you will, which allows us to take an ontological reality as fact, is what allows. This is the archetype underpinning all of civilization, which allows a human being to be programmed such that this symbol means this action. Like, there's a one-to-one ontological, I see this in reality, it means this. This is how you can program people to say, you're being punished, you're being rewarded.
It's when
it means this, it means that.
when our writing stopped reflecting our living experience, for example, and started to work on mathematics for field production.
It's always going to be like to the observer listening to us talk about this kind of stuff. It's always going to be some fluffy feeling thing, like.
Well, we did say that this is a solipsistic treatment. It has to be, by definition. Us having to take in the time to talk about ideologies, ontologies, what we think is right, what we think is
Right.
wrong. That's all solipsistic shit.
But this is.
But we at least say that. Not that that's not a brownie point.
Can acknowledge.
But it is something that is at least embedded in the thought process. And even if we don't make use of that knowledge and fuck up our own lives based on our own understanding, somebody else doesn't have to. You know? because that's the point. Like, the point isn't to say how great we are.
So,
Fuck
just to grasp onto the point where we wanted to go with toxic masculinity, this idea of a breakaway civilization, this idea of order. Of order of the state ruling over the people, and the people being fundamentally disconnected and feeling alienated from the state. This is the origin of the soul and the zeitgeist of the breakaway civilization.
First of all, we have to speak to the fact that civilization reified the mythological gender roles of order and chaos in the most grotesque possible way. They reified it by by making it an ontological distinction between biological men and women, which was great for the mythology, but is completely fucking up our ability to live with each other. Because what does it do? It pits us against each other.
Sure, it puts rigid ontological roles over top of the body.
Right.
This is the usual problem that keeps
And removing
happening.
and on top of that, removing the meaning that mythology had brought into it to begin with. It's this removal of mythology
Right.
and meaning.
So there used to be a much more purposeful and meaningful reason for saying, like, what is a woman, what is a man.
Now the purpose for it is to know which part of the mechanism they fit into.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so we can tune this up all day long, and still we won't reach those who haven't been reached. But maybe through meditation, so we can explain. We wanted to get into toxic masculinity.
So I want to cover
and how this disconnection of the breakaway civilization fits into this chaos order model.
Okay. So first, before we get into, I want to do another. Let's step back a little.
Okay.
Why masculinity? Why not femininity? Why is that? Why is it that's what's toxic? Comes back to
Is there toxic femininity?
Yeah, like, because that came up with the conversation with Jack, for example. So I wanted to address that.
Right.
Why is it that why is femininity not included in the toxicity discussion? Well, first, we're not coming in at this from the ontological perspective,
Right.
where we're looking at men doing things and women
We're
doing
not
things.
even assuming that this is the dicks and the vaginas are doing this and that.
We're not. So right off the bat, we're not discussing biological sex.
Right off the bat, a biological female can express toxic masculinity.
Right. That's what this amounts
We
to.
have to get to there. We have to get there where we
Yeah.
can accept that kind of statement.
We've already established that we're talking the mythology of a man, the mythology of a woman. So these are mythological narratives, not men and women in ontologies. So, different discussion altogether.
Mhm. Right.
The second part to it is
And
the
all the
distinct.
baggage that comes with that.
The second part is the metaphor of chaos and order, and so it is the male that is metaphored with male is the metaphor for the order from the perspective of being the seed, not being the seed, but the potential of the seed. So the thing that the seed will become, that idea, and the thing that it uses as materials, raw material, to form the thing that becomes, is the female. And that is used, those words are used because biology provides that similar template.
Right.
It's
Analogy.
an analogy, it's a metaphor.
Right. We're not saying the thing that has the seed is the male mythologically.
Exactly. So even in our, so if we were to take our mythology and give it some more biological treatment, we would say that both the sperm and the egg represent the male counterpart, the womb, the orgasm, birth
The body.
itself, the body itself, both male body and female body represents the female in the interaction. And the mental desire for each other represents the
Right.
male part of the interaction for
Yeah.
both. So it's
you
very
see how
mixed.
this takes like a whole, it shifts the whole field 90 degrees and almost splits everybody in two.
Yes, that is entirely
So
the
you
point.
can't still be clinging to your identity of, oh, I'm an alpha, whatever, blah, blah, I'm a beta.
Well, it makes that kind of thing very, very suspicious. Like, what does that say now? Well,
and is
we
that your
we
whole...
found and interestingly enough, we did find a spot for these statements, and they line up with our spectrum of stupidity.
Right. In which civilization breaks away.
In which you try to reify the mythological male with the biological man, and then try to assert an alphaness or a betaness to that.
Right.
And then you get your,
Yeah.
dick and cunt, and you
And
get
it's
your...
such bad times to be just enraptured in that kind of thought process where everything becomes an anxiety that you can't control. You just keep applying labels and this and that, and reward punishment mechanisms. It becomes mechanistic, and that's why an anxiety comes, because you ultimately don't control any of it.
Well, not only that, but look at the conversations that pop out of it. An endless stream of victims and bullies. Like, nothing but. And it doesn't matter how you turn the conversation, all that happens is that more words are thrown into the mix. More words. We had men and women as our basis for mythology. Now we have LGBTQ as our basis of our mythology. Okay, what's the next phase? And my commentary is not about, again, it's not political commentary. Yes, there are people have their orientations. People have their whatever personal needs. And
okay,
none of that is what we're touching on.
You mentioned LGBTQ and all this spectrum and all this, and that makes me kind of wonder. This chart here is a dichotomy, polarized dichotomy, one and the other, right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
so this is pointing.
It has a unity on the one hand side, but a kind of a multiplicity to it from another
Right.
perspective.
Yeah, if you go over to the left side here, in the absurd,
Everything is absurd.
right?
Even the ordered state,
And
it lives in a state of absurdity because you shift the context of that state and it's no longer ordered.
not to mention that
Which is
that symbol of that,
yin yang
and then you have
inside of each other. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. This is that. This is.
So this isn't separate from any of that, right?
Yeah,
So
no.
it's all absurd, in a way.
Yeah. The
Right.
order is not less absurd than chaos. It's just not.
Right. That's a good, proper statement.
Because here's a very, very crude but very useful analogy. What's order for the spider is chaos for the fly.
Right.
If you just think about it that way. So there's no.
Different subjects.
The ontological issue that we're so hung up on here is the fact that the way it reifies an abstract concept onto a concrete one in such a way that dictates further systemic processing.
But this is the
That you
Breakaway
ca-
Civilization.
That you
That's
cannot.
exactly it.
The mechanism that you're stuck
we have
plugging
no
yourself
interface.
into is limited,
Within the system, there is no
and so
outside of the system.
and so one of the questions that arises is that how pure is that potential versus the one that we've actually introduced into this discussion, first of all, because the purity of that potential becomes completely crustified, if you will. This is the crusting of the APS that we used to talk about,
Mhm.
where it becomes this not amorphous. It just becomes this
Purity. Oh, now you're sounding like a cis white male nationalist talking about your purity of potentiality. The potential must be pure, like the Führer says.
Sure.
Sorry, tangent there. It just came to me.
No, language is always going to be what it is.
So what makes a pure potentiality a more pure? It's that it's not obstructed by these crust and ontological crusting.
By mechanics that don't
Breakaway
reflect it.
Civilization meet the window, the cognitive alignment window,
Yeah.
and wherever that other chart was for it, this one. Right?
Yeah, Breakaway Civilization would constitute a civilization that is stuck with its window above the horizon.
Socially stuck.
Meaning it cannot meaningfully reconstruct its narratives. What it amounts to is that it's stuck in its own narrative loop.
Stuck.
And it keeps perpetuating a narrative loop. And that's the death cycle. That's the that's the definition of taking a set of symbols that are have the pure potential for full life, and having them loop into each other, such that it's dead. And there is no life, just a dead mechanism. Yes, calcification. That would be another word for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's called that is because it becomes extremely rigid. It does not shift shape. It becomes incapable of holding other beliefs. The idea of using beliefs like clothes become extremely alien to such a person. This is the kind of person that will tell you words have a meaning. I used to be that person. This is the kind of person that will say to you that you have to subject yourself to the Nicene Creed if you want to be a true Christian.
Oh boy.
Or you have to go through the ritual of taking the refuge if you want to be a true Buddhist. Anything that comes with the word true something, like our true Christian.
Yes, so that is a evidence of a internally reifying. Their neural operating system is running through cycles of reification. And not shift, that window is not being allowed to shift down to the mimetic, the archetype, which breaks and opens up all existing structure into its different pieces.
What they're not.
So it can't be that.
So in other words, what they're not tapping into is how their own experience is informing what they're experiencing.
They're being told to shut the fuck up, get back in line,
by themselves.
Don't say anything.
No. They're not being told. They tell
right.
themselves.
Well, this is the totalitarian aspect of this.
Right.
Breakaway Civilization. We literally all believe it. We tell it to ourselves.
Okay, so I kind of started to touch
That's the scary part. There's no iron fist dictator that's going to hurt you. It's your neighbor. This is a problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
When these masses of people and information and all that can, through mass media especially, whip up, utilizing this type of a structure being in place, that there are no people paying attention, not like shamans, ancestors being taught by the older generation how to be the hero, how to return as a hero, which is that journey of rebirth, being reborn into God's kingdom by a virgin birth. God literally inseminates your mind. That's what we need to be talking about. As far as what does it take to be a man?
Who
is the real man?
How many triggers have you stepped on that one? Just curious.
Right, now respond.
No, you're right, but let's reframe this into a more model speaky sort of way.
Do your best. Hit me with your best shot.
Well, what you're saying is basically the entire scheme here, because it already is ignorant, right, of everything outside of its ongoing narrative.
Right. That becomes a matter of faith. Remember the faith bootstrap,
Yes.
which we kept bringing up.
But what I'm saying, hold on. Well, what I'm saying is that that creates a situation where it's locked up in its narrative and calcifies to that narrative.
Right.
Right?
Because this window tends to be liking itself just how it is.
And so the question becomes, if you want to ask the question is who's the hero, you have to ask the question of, is it the person that chooses the lock, the calcified locked into narrative existence, or is it somebody who is conscious of the zeitgeist, the quality of the zeitgeist that this brings alongside with it due to neglect of the mimetic and
You
everything.
mean when you discover that problem?
Well, it's always there. The quality is
course.
always there. The
Right.
question,
So
the
you're
question
bringing the
is,
zeitgeist in,
so-
right? Which leads to
so
this.
the question of the
Yes.
hero becomes: is the hero is the person that takes on the quality and doubles down in their belief, not faith, belief. So reifying the same calcified narrative, right? You don't need faith for belief. Trust me.
Right. So that's a primary juxtaposition there.
Belief is simply taking that narrative as reality. I'm not talking about taking a step of
Okay, so we're
believing
now we're also
and
bringing
worshiping.
in
I'm
the
talking
word.
about the
We're
narrative.
bringing the word hyperstition in with this definitely as a difference in with faith is a hyperstitious act because you're explicitly taking a model into reality and planting its seed and you're having its
right. It has to have
post-vision.
a shift in its motion.
You're having a model and a post
Where-
vision of
whereas
what
this-
that model is going to be.
Right, and look, we're literally putting the idea of the seeding something, changing it versus something that reifies itself again and again and calcifies into a more
Right.
concrete, solid crust of itself.
And we're kind of calling this the artifact, the encounter of it, the bits and pieces of material that one finds to say and see
That this is a calcification.
I have become aware that this is somehow different
Yeah.
than normal programmed structure reality of my workplace.
So does the hero double down on the calcification as a response to the clear pain of the zeitgeist, or do they shatter the construct itself that got them there in the first place, dig into the mimetic, shift the window down, and see how the calcification happened in the first place, because they are also part of the driving force. And with that, the ability to respond to it returns.
Pain of the zeitgeist.
Because if you're stuck in that window, right? Remember, only civilization requires that you stick your like you're stuck in that framework of teeth and
But we
claws.
keep getting beaten with the reward and punishment cycles of the
this
system state.
Exactly. The system is the predator from which we are constantly running. And so angst for existence itself became a reality due to this. Because predators did not used to exist at all times
Because
of
eventually
day.
the state will have a major problem with you. Eventually.
Eventually, yes.
If you just let it go enough, the state's going to have a big problem with you.
Nobody makes it out
Interesting.
unscathed.
Seems true.
Well, this is the whole stacking, crushing down, right? Like eventually, it doesn't matter where you find yourself. Eventually, you'll find yourself
Right.
at the bottom.
And
Even if you're a rich billionaire, what happens on your deathbed?
don't mind me, it's all empty.
Like, what happens on your deathbed when the kiddos want your money?
So here's the ego flame stack,
Yeah.
which
Like,
I thought
when you're look,
we might enjoy.
let's imagine yourself as a dying billionaire. You're on your deathbed. You have like a few breaths left in you. What are your kids doing?
So these are just two different stacks.
Yeah.
There are many stacks.
Yeah, this is one stack split into two sideways, upwards, for growing itself upwards with reform, and kicking off the bottom of itself so that it could survive.
So at the bottom is...
the bottom is what sustains the top. So, the
So there's
workers.
flames like coal
Yeah.
burning.
Yeah, this is a flame picture. Cool. Yeah, so imagine what happens to the billionaire who's at the top when he's on his deathbed and the kids are vying for the money. First of all, you're kicked down all the way there because all the action is happening here, and they are revolting against each other, splitting up, fighting, or grouping
with each other under leadership of like who's going to organize all this, right? But you're the dying billionaire. Guess what? Fuck out of here. What the fuck? You're gone.
Yeah.
You're gone. What happened to King George?
I almost
They
could see your
poisoned
shoe.
him.
Let's see your shoe again. There it is.
Go. What happened to King
Jeez.
George when he was dying? They fucking killed him so that they could report his death on the proper newspaper day. They poisoned him. I don't know if he wanted that or not. Like that's a different.
Maybe,
that's
maybe
a different.
he was in on it.
No, like
You know,
like
it's
I,
part
I'm
of
not
his
asking that.
legacy.
I'm
He
not
can have his
asking that
legacy.
question. I'm demonstrating an interesting fucking thing that they've done. In order for the news of his death to appear in the morning paper, they've given him a cocktail of morphine and cocaine to kill him the night before. For the
See,
fucking headlines.
He definitely asked for that. Like, think about it. Morphine, cocaine.
Step back and look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
Is all I'm
Yeah,
saying
no,
here.
the whole, it all
Like-
fit together really well, didn't it?
Jesus Christ!
This body had to be ejected,
Like-
booted, kicked off, shuffled off the
Fuck
earth
out of here.
with a heel.
So it doesn't matter where you find yourself on the in the ego stack at all. You're going to be crushed at the bottom. If not,
Right.
if not in your life, at the end of it for sure. There are, yeah. Anyway,
And maybe you'll love the sacrifice. Just wishing to be a king that goes away without disturbing too many people. You know, everything just neat and tidy. You know, it's your time.
those
Affairs in
people,
order.
those people don't tend to surround themselves with that situation at the end. They don't have people like that.
Yeah, no kidding.
They either like there has been
Maybe
billionaires that
maybe
would
they're
simply
jester.
give it away.
The court jester. That's his only friend. The only one who's allowed to say things without him not being literally murdered.
Literally.
Yeah.
Speaking
Only
of
the
murder,
jester may say certain things. Do not insult the king unless you're funny. Back again.
All right.
So if you pull on the thread of toxic masculinity, you actually end up at Breakaway Civilization.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to talk or discuss about, like, just
So-
to reiterate, the idea of
I want
the toxic male, the problem of male toxicity,
Yeah.
outside of the scope of the typical male-female ontological trappings.
So yeah, to bring this all back, to make sure we're crystal clear on this as to how we established that it's male toxicity, masculine toxicity, why the feminine toxicity. First of all, to reiterate,
Well,
we're coming from the place of mythology.
we never defined a feminine toxicity.
We can't.
yet.
We can't, and I'm going to explain this. First of all, this relies on the fact that we have attributed the metaphors to order and chaos from our mythos space, not the ontological space in which men and women are found. So, so first of all, we're using our own mythology to define the terms. The second part to it is that within our mythology, all aspects of control, mechanism, and all of that lies in the ordered side of the equation. So that's where control is found. So it's found on the male side of the
Right.
Of the coin. Again, referring back to our mythology, not the ontology that is generally used for this discussion.
Yeah, so this is actually third order cybernetics.
So because of that,
And we could talk about the manifold between the
Because of
senses,
that-
the body, and the mind, as well as fourth order cybernetics. But carry on.
so because of that, as we've already established, we can have masculine men, masculine women. Because of what masculine means in our mythology,
Right.
we can have
masculine biological men,
men,
masculine
men,
biological women.
and
Excuse me.
both of these can be toxic, and that toxism is part and parcel with the process of runaway civilization, and that is the
Right.
reification of their gender roles into a mechanism, which is again the ontology.
That's a part of it, but what you're pointing at was a much deeper archetype, which allows us to reify this meaning and get stuck with
Well,
our
all
cognitive
you
alignment window stuck, and that's through education.
All you
It's,
need-
it's imposed on
But
us.
all you need to do that is to say that mythological men are biological men, mythological women are biological women. That's how you reify the roles,
Right.
right? And this is your superstition,
So-
believing words are real.
Yes, but we're
At the
not.
same
We're
time-
not actually saying this to ourselves. It just is happening. This is a model of what's happening.
This is in internal thought
Right.
processing. It's not
Right.
an external thing you say to yourself. But because of that
Equation.
situa-
It's a reification.
But
it's an
that
equation.
activity, but to do that, according to this mythology, is a male act.
Right.
To reify
The Portal
to this-
Mountain mythology.
The Portal Mountain mythology that says chaos is women and order is men is also saying that biological men and women can be masculine.
and even then, it's
with
better to
that-
say masculine, feminine. Like, just start using those words instead of male, female. To
Well, I
maybe
haven't really.
towards biology.
I haven't really thought through how
It's
to
not a
how
big
to
deal.
how
Not a
to
big deal.
how to assemble the verbiage just yet in totality, but
Seems masculine and feminine is much more
so masculine men,
delicate terms.
so
to
masculine
use
men
for,
and
for spiritual
masculine
concept.
masculine men and masculine women in our mythology refers to the fact of people with a temperament towards the abstract. So, in the most
Okay.
in the most
I believe
concrete
that was nicely linked.
in the most concrete expression of that, you get you get two variation also, masculine and feminine in their own ways, one more grounded, one more psychedelic. So that's your
Devotional.
that's your devotional, that's your perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
On the male flip side, you also have a male female division, masculine feminine division, from the more abstract to the more concrete. And so what you find is that in both divisions there is a gravitas towards the happy medium, in which you'll find essentially the vast majority of both men and women in the mythological sense, but also in the biological sense, with a great cross section towards just temperamental tendencies.
Right, those dots in the opposing of the icon of the yin
So-
and yang.
So while we do kind of have a categorical division, if you will, but it's more like gravity. It's not about reification.
Well, interestingly,
in the
our
standard sense.
temperaments relate. Well, this is a great chart for it, obviously.
Also, the eye chart would have been helpful with this, because that's where I was seeing the distinction in my
but
head.
I was going to say, just to pull this into today's discussion here, this does relate basically to these four, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, these are always these are always the front and center in terms of our discussions. Yeah. So the division I was referring to really exists like this. So we have these two as being
Right.
this is divided like that, but then within each
Yeah.
we have I would say it's so it's kind of like here that you find both the cross section of mythological. So if you so it's kind of like it's giving you like the mythological and the biological at the same time, but really it's all mythological here.
Yeah,
And what you find is that biologically you will get a great cross section of convergence with this.
Wait. Yeah, that's interesting.
This is just going to show that the majority of people will land within that divide. So this is the eye diagram, if you remember it.
Right.
So most people in general gravitate towards devotional and pragmatic, with most men being on the pragmatic and most women being on the devotional. This speaks to the phenomena where you see that most people that have, say, religion in their lives do it because the woman is in the church. This isn't to say that this is like a hard.
Interesting
It's
point.
not. It's not a hard rule or anything. It's
But
just.
yeah.
It's just. This is more likely, and it's a temperamental difference. Temperamental in the sense of,
Right.
but biology does exert some physical signals
Right.
towards one end of the spectrum or another. And it's a complementary spectrum, so it does make
Yeah,
sense
there's
that
like-
in some sense, where one thing diminishes in one place, it will increase in another. That sort of relationship does make sense to occur in a natural setting, because it always balances out that way. Where we can for sure say there's no balance is when there is no counterparts.
Yep. Or just thrown to the wolves without any
Yeah.
culture.
And the thing of this explanation is that even if this has more than enough room for complete divergence from this particular setup, so absolutely you will find pragmatic women. Absolutely you will find academic women. Absolutely, you know what I mean? Like, there is no. The only really real thing to say here is that because MM is stronger, there's more MM here and more FF here, is what we can expect to find more biological women in somewhere near this circle and more in this circle, but it doesn't say anything about any individual whatsoever.
Right.
It's just it's like gravity.
And moreover, the more we learn about perception and different ways and angles of looking at life, we can kind of cover our bases in any situation, become more skillful and talented at
Well, yeah, the journey
navigating
of this,
reality, if you will.
the journey of this would be to actually integrate this,
Expand
to integrate
outward,
all
yep.
of this, rather than to calcify with a single niche.
Right. It keeps pointing at that calcification being related to the problem of breakaway civilization itself.
Well, this points at the fact that there is a lot of mixing to be had, for example. Right? Like, we're all in this together in some sense.
And not only that, but we all have parts. We can look at this in a self manner as a model of self.
Sure, yeah.
And we can all see that this is my concrete, abstract, and mimetic, and like do meditations to find out what does it mean concrete or abstract. Like what does it mean to focus on an object, right? What does that mean when that happens, and how does that relate to this? And then you're like, okay, I can expand this outwards and see this is a model for
where the isomorphisms are.
Yeah, a model for where does this this
really,
triangle come from? Right, those three layers.
Right. The identification of where this triangle fits is really the same thing as this artifact being quote unquote plugged into the zeitgeist or
So
the individual soul, if you will.
it's summarized in the middle here with archetype, model, and guild.
Which is the most basic words that you can use for the
Right.
structure.
This is fractal just outwards. The same. It means the same thing in the other triangles. And then back on this, we have archetype, model, guild. Hold on, right?
Mhm.
So we've added yet another reference to this, as if it couldn't get any more packed, as if there weren't enough angles to talk about of just what's right there.
Yeah.
So this is temperament apprehension. So when you have a preference, a kind of perceptive preference, you'll tend to see this triad in one triangle or another in that format. It's kind of like, so this is the devotional preference, I guess you could say. Perceptive preference is to see through this lens. Like these are three lenses, you
Mhm.
could say, right? To view reality, perception. So here are archetypes. We have a narrative in the devotional process, over in the pragmatic. And the archetype being phenomena in the academic. Right. Anyways.
And the perceptive would actually utilize all three.
So talk about connecting charts here. Yes, correct. Then to come back to this would be an implication of a yet greater circle as being the domain of that.
Mm-hmm. The whole on whole. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we connected a lot of charts there, which was kind of promised last time, and we did quite a bit, but I'm pretty impressed with the work we did on this one.
So to wrap up the toxicity part, actually, because we still didn't do that. In our mythology, all of the control is occurring on the male order side, just by the definitions of these words. And so, it is when the male runaway side of the full stack
that is locked up into itself,
Yeah, the death circle.
that we are describing as toxicity. At the
I
same
love the analogy because toxic is a dangerous substance, a chemical or something. It's a great analogy.
Mhm.
In it's a thought toxin.
Yeah, like this is why I thought it to be appropriate to appropriate that word at this point.
Yeah, sure.
And so this is the toxicity element, just said one way. The other way, we've said it before, is that it is the same as the spectrum of solipsism and objectivism, which is the spectrum of stupidity. It is bound to the same mechanism. It is literally the spectrum of what that mechanism produces as an operational platform. So anything done on it is quote unquote stupid. And yeah, and so when you try to reify back the biological man, the biological woman, and place them on the spectrum of stupidity, which means on the spectrum of masculinity, toxic masculinity specifically,
Right, I hear you.
we have a situation in which both men and women exercise an insane fuck ton of toxic masculinity and not much else, which means both men and women biologically
Yeah, no, this is
hate.
helpful. It's helpful.
Both men and women biologically hate the mythological female, just despise her, because she represents the failure of the journey that that the masculine is embarked upon. By definition, the hero's journey, like always in somewhere in that hero's journey.
Right. It's the scapegoat of where the pain is blamed
But
because that's the direction it came from.
But because the object, because due to our own being obfuscated, ignorant, stupid, aka using stupidity to move forward, the goal is never reached. So the object of the goal becomes an object of stress
These are
and
technical
pain
terms.
and punishment, and because mythologically it still relates back to the female, to the woman, to the mythological woman, the biological reified woman. Underneath it all, subconsciously, is hated by both men and women in many different formats. The typical one where you typically find the toxic masculinity, where you have like incel groups.
I'll give you a core example. How we are taught to hate ourselves and hate our own body, and essentially enslave and use ourselves,
Yeah.
subjugated to a job, a profession, or whatever. You know, you
That's
must,
another
must
way.
get up at this time, must get up at this. I'm happy to have a job and all this, you know.
That's another way to hate the woman. Yes.
The body is divided, the head from the body. It's a chop situation. That's the Breakaway Civilization.
Or
It
just
started with the head
being
being
punished for
chopped.
getting pregnant. Being punished for getting
So
pregnant.
I wanted to mention also the Breakaway Civilization, which we've called the Axial War. Right? Just kind of like to mythologize that which has been ongoing. Like ever since the first head was chopped, let's say, and there was a fundamental disconnect between the mind and the body, and education perpetuates it and all that. And this is the breakaway, which has been going on for thousands of years. And in the axial age, which what they call the axial religions, they were a lot, I guess, credited to the fact that people could see after thousands and thousands of years of farming grain, wheat, doing alcohol and drugs, that we had somehow fundamentally disconnected ourselves, and there's something that must be fixed. So this is like the official announcement of the zeitgeist and the soul came in the axial age, where we said we know something's missing, but none of these organizations that came up have succeeded in doing anything about it.
Well, because their interest is not in doing anything about it, but to recuperate that zeitgeist. and to reformulate it in such a way
Well, this is the
that
process of the
that
state that's been
perpetuates
run away.
the very process that,
Right.
that caused it.
So this is the civilization accumulating structure via its various appendages through religion and whatnot to learn how to grow bigger and more powerful for its own sake.
Well,
Right? It's
religion.
disconnected from the people itself. This is always remember, the head has been chopped off. In
So-
everything you look at, it doesn't have a head because it's chopped off.
So the Axel Age religion, as you called it, could be summarized basically as the reformulation of the meaningful myths that preceded them into justification for the current structure of the system,
Typically,
such that
sure.
no, this is not a bad thing. This is ready. Progress. This also gives the justification to
Yep.
call the non-progressed peoples barbarians.
Right.
The excuse to
Yep.
place
No, I
them
get
at the
history
bottom of
you're
the
laying down,
stack.
yep.
The excuse to place them at the bottom of the stack because
Back
they're
to the
not
ego flame.
because they're not part of your order. They're
Into the
definitely-
fire.
They're definitely part of the chaos. So they are the woman in the relationship. And I'm not talking about a healthy relationship.
No.
Not the complementary relationship that you men and women actually meant to enjoy, but the reified relationship between power, not power, but
So, as always, we're integrating into a machine
Yeah.
using mechanistic type, reified a meaning of symbols that we see out in the
as reality.
in our environment. We take those symbols in as a certain ontological truth of existence.
Yeah,
That
but
it
that's-
does mean this. That's my reward. That's
That's
my
a-
punishment.
That's a
Oh
literalism.
no, this happened, that means this is going to happen in the system. That's the kind of interaction we can have with the world, which is the autopilot one where the cognitive alignment window is shifted up.
Stuck.
that
Not just shifted,
becomes-
stuck. It's stuck.
Stuck is the problem. We need to be able to put on a different hat, a different shirt, and that's to shift the window down, which
Yeah.
is to...
You can actually think of it as like taking a big.
It's like maintenance mode for your...
You know that game
your
where
ontology.
where the gopher pops up, and you're supposed to hit it with a mallet?
Whack-a-mole.
Yeah, that's how. But we're supposed to do it with a sledgehammer, and then until the fucker goes all the way down and stays there.
Well, but then with training discipline, you have
Well, that's what I mean. It's a
good,
sledgehammer.
nice ontologies that are working better and that are explicitly open and not shut. You know, the jam shut part is a problem when the window is shut intentionally,
Yeah.
and we're taught not to question our own experience, our own reality, and accept that this means that. That's that bridging of that human body, latching it into the slave machine, I guess, of these kind of
Market.
ontologically reified markets.
Market implies slave. In our
Market
in our-
implies
in our parlance.
reification, because
No.
what do you have? You have the
So no. Market
the
implies
trade.
market implies this flame, and this is always its bottom. So a market always implies the violence and the coercion. What were you saying? Sorry.
well, not only that, but your crops being lost because you couldn't sell them on market because someone didn't like it, or whatever. It's a
It's
trial
another
and error.
it's another form of war. It's another way to burn an
You
ego.
planted one grain, nobody likes it.
You don't have to kill the body, right? Like we're not talking about like people. We're talking about egos. So this could be inside of inside of one's mind. But it could be people.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on which matrix we're discussing.
Well, this is the kind of the sad story about it, is that this story of Breakaway Civilization, which is kind of like the shadow side, the shitty side of the idea of having a great social operating system together with other human beings, but this is how it is.
Stuck in the
It's
stuck in the machine, essentially.
It's stuck looking like this, where all you have are stacks and stacks around the world
of machines.
people just mashing the shit out of each other, and there's a fire at the bottom of just people falling into the bottom. And that's the striving upwards is what causes that furnace below.
And you know what it's sold to us as? What the myth that the system sells us for this picture that makes it sound A-okay and this virtue signal. You know what they call it? They call
What?
it competition. And they tell us that the entire world is comprised of self-interested competing agents. That's the myth of economy.
What we are. We're self-interested.
Competing agents.
Lots of competition.
But really,
These are
Really,
like
like,
different
really-
different nations and different world orders.
but really what they're trying to sell you with that statement is that this is not something that can't be resolved with just a little bit of more hard work in the system, which means just a little bit more of the same.
of course.
So that's that is the how the system recuperates by taking this idea in its entirety and telling you all of its results can be done through a little bit more hard work. Just vote, just do this, just do that.
Right.
But what that is the same fucking
Yes.
structure.
And no, don't tell anybody about that Portal Mountain. Don't tell anybody about that.
Well, as soon as the artifact does not hide itself as something that can be sold as just a little bit of more hard work. See, this is how we're painting ourselves too. We're painting ourselves. We just need to create this corporation to shield us from the sun. Blah 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 blah. It sounds exactly
Oh, yeah.
the same.
It does sound the
That
same.
is not accidental, and that is what I said
It's a
earlier
Trojan
about
horse, as they call it.
well, because the only thing that the system can see as okay is if you do this again.
Right. So,
So if it sees you do this, like another ego, like another part of
Yes.
the puzzle of this, it's sure as hell going to leave you alone unless you step on its particular toes.
Right. So, having two paths, one is as an insider, one is as an outsider. And as the outsider, you have to, we're talking about projecting the model artifact. With the insider, you're having the MA, model artifact, inside of a shell. That's the difference. In both ways, your goal is this model artifact, which is different paradigm. Emergent, something outside of, right? See?
Yeah.
Models.
Yeah, that's really the gist of it. So, the toxicity is in the act. The masculinity is in the framework, and the distinction is in the mythology. So, with this, we can move away from conversations that deal with men and women in a biological and ontological sense, in particular, because
Right.
according to the model, that element is not the significant element. The biology may inform us
Right.
something statistically,
So that's
but
a,
it will not actually be useful.
that's a collection of ontological truths, and what we're interested in is an archetypal stepping back, a shifting of the alignment window,
So,
and
even though we give very specific distinctions to male, the female,
more
and
pure
all of that,
potential.
and all of that, we are certainly not in the boat of placing men and women biologically in any category, and this entire framework is not meant to be looked at as a set of rules for
How men and women
figure-
should behave.
yeah, to figure out one's own gender roles. What it would do is probably inform people of what they're more likely to find in their
Well-
immediate vicinity.
Yeah. like toxic masculinity being projected out of both biological males and females.
Yeah, where is that concept? In the
That's
normal
totally happening.
in the normal discussion, it's not.
So that makes it more useful. Again, Portal Mountain, as we just brought up at the very start, our glossary, we are appropriating terms, creating our own set of meaning, or web of meaning.
So another way to look at it is that from the perspective of Portal Mountain, feminism and masculinism are one and the same. And why is that?
The ism schism?
Yeah, why would that be? And that's because feminism, the feminine trait of like holding life together, pertains to both men and women. So it is masculine and feminist, masculinist and feminist, if you will. Oh boy, words. To be nurturing,
to push order,
to be nurturing and to push order and to look, we're a whole package. We're always going to be a whole package.
Yep.
We may take on different roles in individual interactions, but we don't have roles to play as a rule. We have us to play as a rule, which can land anywhere in the whatever spectrum, physically,
Right.
mythologically, biologically. Can be biologically one and have the traits of the other mythologically, and guess what? You're a guy sucking dick. Oh, good God, such an awful, awful, awful situation.
No.
Fuck. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
That's where I draw the line.
This is what I mean, though. Like, it's like it. And this is like where Portal Man goes, okay, well, all sex is gay. You're, even if she has a pussy, you're engaging with the male part of her.
Right?
So, whatever.
Back to that. Two bodies.
Sexual intercourse predates sexual dimorphism.
And this is the point you wanted to bring up again to try and, let's see,
Solidify. Alright. So, to use biology as a template for mythology, again,
You're talking about asexual reproduction.
asexual reproduction is like the first step, but sexual reproduction, when it started, did not start between sexually diverse, sexually different entities. They were both sexually similar entities.
It would make
Hermaphrodites.
sense. How do you make the jump, in other words, from asexual to, right, like self-propelling
Well,
to having a pair?
now you have mechanisms to inseminate each other. So both have eggs, both have sperm, is what that means.
Right.
Like
So
some
I think
speciation
the reason you wanted to
can
bring this
occur.
up is because imagine this in evolution. How can I
Yeah.
possibly be a man?
Without
I'm such a
one.
man. Hey, do you know your great-great-great-great-great-great-great and all of his great-greats were like basically
Hermaphrodites.
fucking each other in all the holes and taking it every which way?
Basically, yes. So it's the point is basically moot. So biologically speaking,
Just so you know, your
biologically speaking, at
great-grands were
first
like that.
both had both parts for the interaction,
So point taken.
and some speciation had occurred, in where the species would move one set of the apparatus to just one mechanism and one to the other. But note that that did not come first. It required far more energy investments and far more stacking to even emerge. It had to emerge on top of
Yeah.
hermaphroditic, whatever, I don't
Sure.
even know how to say it, setup.
Yeah, like
So,
I
sexual
bet you
dimorphism emerges out of sexual monomorphism.
in higher layers are probably holding those potentials of the culture to the point where different people kind of ended up taking on different roles anyways, and
Mhm.
then this kind of differentiation happened. Like you would see a differentiation before it cuts down the stack.
Right. So it's how Vicky describes the cultural traditions of her people, where women had to stay behind due to the energy requirements of rearing children. right? Like, it was simply not an option for
That's
a
a
woman
common-
who is nursing to go out into the
Common
cold.
problem, right?
And then, but it was within her power to take whatever was brought in and use that time to fashion clothes and whatever. Hence,
So there's
there
some
was
point of
roles.
divergence of a being that's not the birth carrying being.
Yeah, like
There's
one
some
follows
cutoff
the
point.
other.
That's kind of what I meant by the cut down to the stack before it biologically kind of bifurcates at all these levels.
But
We've
every-
had all these order lines up first, and how the fuck does that happen?
But every time we've normalized the situation for men and women through technology, for example, where we renormalize the starting point, the baseline, aka birth control, aka all of the different modern developments with regard to
Mhm.
control. We didn't re we didn't update the mental
Oh man,
the mental hiccups
no, we haven't.
at all.
Has any care been taken along the way?
No. And so that's like what makes the point about mythology so important, is that this is how you do it. This is what you need to do.
So
in a
mythology has to be very nebulous and amorphous in a way to be able to take the shapes of the stack below, because that's how you allow evolution of what's below.
Exactly, and the
is
only-
to kind of vaguely
And the only
approximate
reason we
it.
have male and female representations in our mental mythology narrative is because there is some biological templating to utilize
It's
for
kept
the
happening,
metaphor.
right? Break times then.
That's what makes the metaphor work. To
begin
begin
Mhm.
with, you can relate it to something.
Exactly.
It's fucking that.
Didn't it get better? Did
So-
it not?
The one thing I wanted to mention last is that you can actually see in our model hints as to why certain situation happen in, say, the sphere of the incels. And it has to basically do with, well, looking at what we've done with the hero's journey. And if you've noticed in
The
our little,
incels.
yeah, if you've noticed in our divide between where's the shit?
Right. So this discussion about
Where's the archetypes?
scapegoating.
There's scapegoating, yes. But I want
Scapegoating.
to use the diagram for the archetypes. Where is the fuck is it?
Archetypes. Oh, the chart?
Yeah.
It's gotta be up top. It's right there, is it? No.
Right there. Here it is. So the
Voila.
there was a lot of discussion about how we're stuck here in male toxicity, right? And I think it becomes kind of clear and obvious that the holistic view would be to sort of incorporate the whole stack, order and chaos, together in one unified, so to speak, absurdity, right? It's like if you were to listen to the rhetoric that we're basically getting
This
to.
is what the shifting of the cognitive alignment window down does, is give you access to this kind of a thing.
So, in other words, the hero's journey, right, is a male journey to reintegrate the self with the female. So, internally,
Right.
externally, whichever way.
Yeah.
Is the
That's,
overarching theme, and so
Definitely a great thing to mention
and-
as we kind of wrap
and
things
so
up here.
if you're imagining how this mythology is kind of internally mentally real, that we're trying to flush out, and at the same time unknown to the toxic male, in whichever flavor they come,
Mm-hmm.
men and women, regardless, what you're seeing is an unobtainable object, because from the one, it's a runaway process. It's a runaway process that perpetuates itself, so you can't escape it, which means that the goal of the actual reintegration with the female counterpart is unreachable and is a source of constant disappointment, a feeding of the zeitgeist, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a painful experience, and one of its manifestations
So the soul
is
is a pain.
one of its manifestations is to put the woman on a pedestal as an object to obtain, to win by the man, to ornament himself with,
Right.
right?
Systemic interaction.
A situation no reasonable woman tends to want to find herself in,
It's
because
part of an ongoing
because it
machine of some
yeah.
rich man who
because
blah,
it
blah, blah.
because it removes her ability to be a human being. And so this individual would now be faced with a repetitive source of rejection, a completely fucked up narrative that feeds him the dual notion that these women should be on the pedestal, and the outcome result of them constantly rejecting him, therefore not allowing that person to quote unquote obtain his quote unquote prize
of being put on the pedestal.
of having somebody on the pedestal for them to gawk at.
Yep.
And so you have the paradoxical outcome of a complete loathing for women and anything to do with
Right.
non-machine-like,
So you're saying
logical, perpetual.
feminism hasn't gone far enough. Basically, we haven't.
It hasn't gotten anywhere.
It hasn't identified the sourceness of the toxic masculinity
Every time-
embodied in every single one of us, all beings, Never
every
mind what's between your
reification,
legs.
every progression, every reification of every feminist movement had been commodified.
Right,
The
and
only-
that's not to say that good things can't come out of
No,
these types of
no,
processes. We
Like
have
for
technology and all this.
example, it gained women the ability to work and make money and vote and all of that jazz, so that at least they're not living as an
And to be able to be
life.
allowed, this is like the idea of the state having law, control, dominion over
So-
a people,
All of this,
in which we must be able to interact with the law and change the law.
all of this
right?
removes femininity from society. All of this removes femininity from society itself, but at least it allows women not to suffer the burden of being too female. Right? It removes. It does alleviate a certain portion of it. It doesn't remove the problem that caused it. It doesn't remove the
Right.
situation that perpetuated this, but
Well-
it does at least alleviate a certain significant portion of the population from having to deal with problems that are by simply removing the identification of
This-
that with female.
And so you're talking. We're
with
talking about simply expanding civilization itself into a bigger husk.
Yeah.
Of mechanism.
But in our ontology, what this does is it removes the mythological female from the picture entirely. It's still loathed. It's just that a lesser significant portion of the population is now quantified as the feminine. It's just that more women are now more masculine and become not hide, but are left. The system leaves them well enough alone to some extent. But
It's the same idea as we were talking about
But it always
with
comes
our
through.
with our enterprise, putting the shell over top of the corporation so that it kind of blends in. That's all we're trying to.
That is part of it, yeah.
Civilization has been trying to at least shelter
to some
the
extent,
individuals from the existence
yeah,
of itself.
to some extent, we are a part and parcel doing the exact same thing. So this is not again a like. It sounds like I'm saying it's like a useless movement, but it's not. It's a reactionary movement that doesn't have the DNA core that says this is the problem. Not in terms of men and women,
You're
but in
talking
terms
about
of ego.
feminism in particular.
Yeah,
these type.
but the division is deeper. The division is far deeper than the biological.
And
stuff.
hopefully we've been able to elucidate that division in our discussions about the Breakaway Civilization. You know, the Axial War, the Great Axial War.
Yeah.
The chopping off of the head of the very first person who ever had their head chopped off, and that's how a society, in its Breakaway Civilization format, began. With the first head being chopped off. That's how. That's
I don't know-
the
I don't
dawn
know
of
how-
civilization.
I don't know how many people will understand your
very
metaphor.
point. This is where
We're not talking
civilization
about
started.
a chicken with its head cut off, by the way. Although that's the good image. That's
And let's not be naive. Of course, this is what has been had to be held at bay by shamans and elders in the younger population. This runaway process that people become stupid. They've
I
always
have-
become stupid.
I have a counterpoint. Finally, I'm going to make a comment about.
Okay.
It's not going to be toxic femininity, but what it is it's basically like undeveloped, stagnant existence, if you will. So without
So the feminine side
yeah, on the feminine side, the chaotic side, if there is no
of the
push,
stupidity spectrum.
yes,
right.
if there's no push towards any kind of order at any point,
Externally.
and it just remains like this undifferentiated goo, you also don't have meaning. You also don't have anything.
So this is like the obsession with one's own ontology. Maybe. That's I was just kind of thinking.
Nobody really has their own. That's not possible because
I mean the
language is a given.
solipsistic apprehension of their knowledge.
Well, yeah, like the lack of giving structure to anything at all. So postmodernism fits there.
There could actually be a consequence for doing something. Can you imagine that?
Well, do you remember how I said, like, even order, if you shift the perspective in the chaos, this is order, and you shift in the perspective, this is order, and whatever. It's the resolve to say that there's never order. That any of those shifts don't cause those pieces of order, or that they're not not that they're not real, but they're like they're so unreal in that there's no emergent anything going on, and it's a kind of like another blocker to, like, it's a stagnation of a different kind. It's a stagnation of never growing up. It's a stagnation of never learning anything, or learning how to live.
This would be the same stagnation as a leader at the top of an empire not taking a god, but instead your own self as the be-all end-all of order.
Or that nothing can be done. It's a complete rejection of any order at all. More like. So basically, full-time victimization.
I see.
I am the victim of the world.
Right, because any way of making sense of it and gaining power over that world
is an ability to respond that you're cowarding off of.
Right. Okay.
And so
that's toxic femininity.
No, it's femininity. I wouldn't call it toxic.
Okay, well,
because toxic.
Then what's so wholesome about that?
No, it's not wholesome either. It's a counterpoint to toxic masculinity.
Right. That's I thought we were.
I wouldn't call it toxic.
Okay, toxic isn't the word.
I would call it more like stagnant femininity or something to that effect. It's your doormat. I can't do anything. Everybody does stuff to me. I don't ever have any control over anything ever at all. Now, of course, that pertains to both men and women. It's just that collectively, statistically speaking, you'll find more women in that situation.
And do you think it's supposed to feel opposite of the toxic aspect of projection? Projection of the male?
Well, the projective part tries to change everybody.
Here's what it is.
They both try to change everybody.
No, it's simple. It's very simple. The toxic part of the femininity is to simply accept that which is being shit upon you from above. And to not even, to just, that's what you accept.
We need to leave. Let's go.
That's the opposite. Time to go, buddy. Yep. Agreed. Anyways, that was a great session. Lots of charts we pulled in on there.
Are you going to be able to collect this later?
I appreciate the Breakaway Civilization discussion. What do you mean by collect? Yeah, well, I mean, that's getting scooped up. All of our charts, usual chartnesses.
All right. I got to go.
Mm-hmm. It is that time to wrap it up. And it's been a pleasure, Zhenya, once again. Just two dudes hanging out.
And this is how two white straight men told you everything you need to know about gender.
In a development meeting.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Let's go.
Yeah, man. Still some jams tonight, though. Seemed too bad you couldn't hang out. Hang out for that, skis. I might live stream it.
Cool.
I might, just for fun. Just to bug people. Anyways, it's been a pleasure. On our way we go. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Jack, especially for your comments there through YouTube. And everybody throughout the week in Portal Mountain who interacts with us and whom we love and love talking to. You are appreciated.
I'm sure we've gained and lost some friends.
All along the way. And with that,